My name is Amelia Graham, I'm 27 years old, and today I'm going to tell you a story that completely changed my life and that of my family. A story about dreams, rejection, and how sometimes life puts us exactly where we need to be to prove our worth. 3 weeks ago, I was in the emergency room at the hospital where I work when I got a call that made my world stop. It was my mother, in tears, telling me that my father had passed out at home and was being taken to the hospital. The same father who, years ago, looked me in the eye and told me that I was just a useless dreamer who would never be good enough to save lives. Ironic, don't you think? But for you to understand how we got to this moment, I need to go back in time and tell you how it all began. I grew up in Cedar Falls, a small town in the middle of the United States where everyone knows everyone. My father, Charlie Graham, was always a practical man, the owner of an auto repair shop that he inherited from my grandfather. My mother, Olivia, worked as a secretary at the local school. We were a middle-class family, nothing extraordinary, but we always had the basics. Ever since I was little, I was always different from other children. While they played with dolls, I was fascinated by how the human body worked. I remember when I was 8 years old, I found an injured bird in the backyard and spent hours trying to take care of it, making a little splint out of popsicle sticks. My mother thought it was cute, but my father just shook his head and said, "Amelia, stop wasting your time with this nonsense." In school, I was always the best student in my class in science. Mrs. Henderson, my high school teacher, always encouraged me. She used to say, "Amelia, you have something special. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise." I took those words to heart and dreamed of being a doctor since I was 12. But at home, the reality was different. Every time I mentioned my dream of studying medicine, my father would roll his eyes. One time at dinner when I was 16, he said to me, "Amelia, you have to be realistic. People like us don't become doctors. That's for rich people, for people with connections. You should think about something more appropriate for your situation." Those words hurt me deeply, but they also lit a fire inside me. I wasn't going to give up. The moment that changed everything happened during my senior year of high school. I had just received an acceptance letter from State University with a partial scholarship to study pre-med. I was so excited that I ran home to tell my parents. I found them both in the kitchen, drinking coffee. "Dad, Mom," I said breathlessly, "you're not going to believe this. I've been accepted to college with a scholarship to study pre-med." My mother smiled, but my father just sighed heavily and said, "Amelia, sit down. We need to talk." He explained to me that even with the partial scholarship, the costs would be very high. Books, housing, food, lab fees. And then there would be medical school, which would cost a fortune. "Your mother and I have talked about this a lot," he said, "and we have decided that we cannot support this fantasy of yours." "Fantasy?" I asked, my heart breaking. "Amelia," he continued, "you are a good girl, but medicine is not for people like us. Why don't you consider nursing? Or maybe working as a lab technician? Those are respectable and more realistic professions." At that moment, I felt like my world had collapsed. But then my father said something I have never forgotten. "Amelia, stop dreaming so big. You will only frustrate yourself and us. Be practical. Some people are born to be doctors, others to be other things." That night, I cried until I had no more tears. But by morning, I had made up my mind. I was going to prove them wrong, even if it meant doing it all myself. I talked to my school counselor, Mrs. Patterson, who helped me find information about student loans and work-study programs. I also looked for part-time jobs to save money for the startup costs. I got a job at the local supermarket and another as a babysitter on the weekends. I worked from 3 p.m. to 10 p.m. at the supermarket, and on Saturdays and Sundays I took care of the Peterson children. I saved every penny over the summer. When I told my parents about my decision to go to college anyway, their reaction was worse than I expected. My father was furious. "Amelia, you are being stubborn and irresponsible," he yelled. You are going to get yourself into huge debt for a childish dream. My mother tried to mediate. Charlie, maybe we should support her. But he interrupted her. Olivia, don't feed her illusions. When she fails, and she will, who will have to deal with the consequences? Us. These words hurt me, but they also strengthened me. I was 18 years old and determined to prove them wrong. The first few years of college were the hardest of my life. I woke up at 5 in the morning to study before class, attended classes all day, worked in the lab at the university in the afternoon, and studied until late at night. On the weekends, I worked as a waitress at a local restaurant. Financially, it was a constant nightmare. There were weeks when I ate nothing but ramen and peanut butter. I remember one time, in my sophomore year, when I was so broke that I couldn't buy the required textbook for my biochemistry class. I spent 2 weeks going to the library every day to read the only copy available. But academically, I was doing well. My grades were excellent, and my professors began to notice me. Dr. Williams, my anatomy professor, offered me a position as a teaching assistant, which gave me a little extra income and valuable experience. During this time, my relationship with my parents deteriorated completely. They rarely called, and when I went home for the holidays, the tension was palpable. My father would often make sarcastic comments about my studies. "How are your medical studies going?" He would ask dismissively. "Have you saved any lives today?" My mother tried to keep the peace, but I could see that she was torn between supporting my dream and maintaining harmony with my father. In my 3rd year, something happened that almost made me quit. I was working in the lab when I got a call from the financial aid office. There was a problem with my student loan, and I would need to find $5,000 in 2 weeks or I would be forced to drop out of college. I panicked. I called my parents, hoping that maybe they would finally help me. My mother answered, and when I explained the situation, she was silent for a long time. "Amelia," she finally said, "you know your father and I don't have that kind of money available." "I know, Mom, but maybe a loan or," she interrupted me, "maybe this is a sign, honey. Maybe it's time for you to accept that this path isn't for you." I hung up the phone, heartbroken. That night, sitting in my small dorm room, I seriously considered giving up. But then I remembered Mrs. Henderson's words, "You have something special. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise." I decided to fight one more time. I went to Dr. Williams, explained my situation, and he helped me get an emergency grant from the university. I also increased my workload, picking up extra shifts whenever possible. The 4th year was more stable. I had settled into a routine, had some savings set aside for emergencies, and was preparing for the MCAT, the medical school entrance exam. I studied for the MCAT like I had never studied for anything in my life. I woke up at 4 a.m. every day to study before class. I did hundreds of practice questions, reviews, and practice tests. When the day of the exam arrived, I was nervous but confident. 3 weeks later, I received my score, 518 out of a possible 528. It was an excellent score that would have made me a competitive candidate for any medical school. I called my parents to tell them the good news. My mom was genuinely happy, but my dad just said, "Let's see if this means anything in the real world." I was accepted to 3 medical schools, including one of the most prestigious in the state. I chose State University Medical School because it offered the best scholarship. The first 2 years of medical school were intense, but I was in my element. Anatomy, physiology, pathology, it all made sense to me. My professors constantly praised my performance, and I was consistently at the top of my class. During this time, contact with my parents became even more sporadic. They seemed resentful of my success, as if it only highlighted how much they had doubted me. In my 3rd year, I began clinical internships. That's when everything really clicked for me. Working with patients, diagnosing problems, helping people, it was exactly what I always knew I wanted to do. I decided to specialize in emergency medicine. I loved the intensity, the variety of cases, the need to make quick decisions that could save lives. I completed my emergency medicine residency at Cedar Falls Regional Hospital, ironically, the same hospital that served my hometown. It was one of the best residency programs in the area, and I excelled quickly. During my residency, I developed a reputation for being calm under pressure and extremely competent in trauma situations. My supervisors frequently praised me, and other residents sought me out for advice. At the end of my residency, I was offered a permanent position as an emergency room physician at the hospital. At 27, I was finally officially a doctor. During that entire time, my parents and I barely spoke. I sent Christmas and birthday cards, but the conversations were always superficial and strained. They never asked about my work, never showed any interest in my new life. And then came that night 3 weeks ago that changed everything. It was a Sunday night, and I was on call when my phone rang. It was my mother, and I almost didn't answer it because we usually only spoke on holidays. "Amelia!" She screamed into the phone, clearly panicked. "Your dad's passed out. We're going to the hospital now." "Which hospital?" I asked, already running to get my keys. "Cedar Falls Regional," she answered between sobs. My heart raced. It was only 5 minutes away. I raced to the emergency room and arrived almost at the same time as the ambulance. I watched my father being carried out on a stretcher, unconscious, with my mother running alongside. When she saw me, her eyes widened. "Amelia, what are you doing here?" "I work here, Mom. I'm an emergency room doctor." She stopped in the middle of the hallway, in total shock. But you." There was no time for explanations. My father was being taken to the trauma room, and I could see from the monitors that the situation was serious. I followed the team into the trauma room. My father was now conscious, but clearly confused and having trouble breathing. His vital signs showed tachycardia and hypotension, a dangerously low blood pressure. Dr. Peterson, the physician on call, began the initial examination. When he saw me, he said, "Dr. Graham, you shouldn't be here. This is your father." "I know, Dr. Peterson, but I can help. I know your medical history." I quickly explained that my father was a type 2 diabetic, had a history of hypertension, and had been a smoker for 30 years. Based on his symptoms, chest pain radiating down his left arm, profuse sweating, and his vital signs, my immediate suspicion was a myocardial infarction. I immediately ordered an EKG. The results confirmed my suspicions. My father was having an ST segment elevation myocardial infarction, a serious type of heart attack that completely blocks a coronary artery. "Dr. Peterson, he needs to go to the cath lab immediately for angioplasty," I said. "Every minute counts." "You're right," he replied. "I'll call the interventional cardiologist." While we waited, I gave him medications to stabilize him, aspirin to prevent more clots, clopidogrel to enhance the anticoagulant effect, and morphine for the pain. I also started him on a heparin infusion to keep the clot from getting bigger. Throughout this, my father stared at me with a look of complete bewilderment. "Amelia," he whispered. Are you really a doctor?" "Yes, Dad," I replied, adjusting his fore. "I'm an emergency room doctor here at the hospital." Tears began streaming down his face. I didn't know. Your mother never told me that you." "Don't talk now, Dad. You need to conserve your energy. We'll take care of you." The cardiologist arrived quickly, and my father was taken to the cath lab. The angioplasty revealed a 95% blockage in the left anterior descending artery. The artery doctors call the widowmaker because when it becomes completely blocked, the outcome is often fatal. Luckily, we arrived in time. Dr. Martinez, the cardiologist, was able to open the blockage and place a stent. The procedure was a success. While my father recovered in the ICU, my mother and I finally had the talk we had needed to have for years. She sat in the waiting room, still in shock. "Amelia," she said, "I don't understand. How did you become a doctor? When did this happen?" "Mommy, I graduated from medical school 2 years ago. I finished my residency 6 months ago, and I've been working here as an emergency room physician ever since. But why didn't you ever tell us? I tried, Mommy, several times. But you always made it clear that you didn't want to hear about my fantasy of being a doctor. She was silent for a long time, processing everything. Then she started to cry. Amelia, we made a terrible mistake. Your father was so scared that you would get hurt, that you would get into debt and not be able to pay it back, that he thought he was protecting you by discouraging you. But he called me a useless dreamer, Mommy. I know, honey. And he was wrong. Dead wrong. When my father woke up from the anesthesia, I was at his bedside. He looked at me for a long time before he spoke. Amelia, he said weakly, you saved my life. I did my job, Daddy. No, he shook his head. You did so much more than that. You became exactly what you always said you would be, even though I tried to stop you. He started to cry, something I had never seen my father do. I was an idiot, Amelia. A complete idiot. I was so afraid of you getting hurt, of you failing, that I became the person who hurt you the most. Daddy! Please let me finish, he interrupted. I thought I was protecting you, but really I was protecting myself. I was afraid that if you tried and failed, it would prove that people like us really can't make it that far. But you proved me wrong. You proved that I'm the one who never dreamed big enough. I spent the next few hours talking to my dad about my journey, the tough years in college, the sleepless nights studying, the sacrifices I made, and how each obstacle made me stronger. Your father was always proud of you, my mother said later. He just didn't know how to express it. He still has a picture of you from your high school graduation in his wallet. My father was in the hospital for 5 days, and I visited him every day. We talked about everything, my years of school, my work, my plans for the future. For the first time in years, I felt like we had a real connection. The day he was discharged, Dr. Martinez pulled me aside. Dr. Graham, your father told me that you are his daughter. I want you to know that your quick and precise response saved his life. If you had arrived 20 minutes later, we might not have been able to save him. Those words meant a lot to me, not only as confirmation of my professional competence, but as validation that my presence in that place, at that moment, was essential. Since then, my relationship with my parents has completely changed. They call me regularly, asking about my work, and my mother has even started telling the neighbors that her daughter is a doctor. My father, in particular, has made an extraordinary effort to make up for the lost years. He asks me about interesting cases I've seen, respecting patient confidentiality, of course, and he's even started taking better care of himself, strictly following his medications and exercising. Last week, he showed up at the hospital during my shift, not as a patient, but to bring me lunch. When the other doctors asked who he was, he proudly replied, "This is my daughter, Dr. Amelia Graham. She's an emergency room doctor here and one of the best you'll ever see." Hearing those words from him, after years of being called a useless dreamer, was one of the most moving experiences of my life. Folks, I tell this story not to criticize my parents, but to show how sometimes the people we love most can be the ones who doubt our dreams the most. And how important it is to persist even when it seems like the whole world is against you. My father wasn't being mean-spirited when he discouraged me. He genuinely believed he was protecting me from disappointment. But what he didn't understand at the time is that the greatest failure isn't trying and failing, it's never trying at all. Today, I'm 27 years old, an emergency room physician at a referral hospital, and I literally save lives every day. But more importantly, I saved the life of the person who almost stopped me from becoming who I am. The irony of life is truly incredible sometimes, don't you think? If you're going through something similar, if someone is doubting your dreams or telling you that you can't achieve your goals, remember my story. Remember that the only real limit to what we can achieve are the limits we impose on ourselves. And parents, if you're watching this, please support your children's dreams. Even if they seem impossible, even if you're afraid. Sometimes, it's precisely when we support our children in the most difficult moments that they find the strength to overcome any obstacle. If you liked this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share in the comments. Have you ever had to prove yourself to someone who doubted you? What was that experience like? I love reading your stories and responding to comments. And remember, never give up on your dreams. Sometimes life puts us exactly where we need to be, at the exact moment we need to be there, to show what we are truly capable of. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.